The first stars began their final surrender as the galaxy exhaled its dying breath. Entire constellations flickering like candle flames in a cosmic wind that carried the scent of endings. Across the spiral arms, tomb worlds stirred beneath skies that had forgotten dawn, their metal surfaces scarred by eons of slumber, while something vast and hungry moved between the stars, leaving only silence where civilizations once sang. The Great Devourer had come at last, and in its wake stretched a trail of consumed worlds, each one stripped to bare rock, every molecule of organic matter transformed into the endless appetite of the hive fleets. Here, in this twilight of existence, the ultimate irony unfolded like a blade between the ribs of eternity. Those who had conquered death found themselves condemned to witness the murder of everything that still lived. The weight of 60 million years pressed against consciousness like the gravity of collapsing suns. And for the first time since flesh became metal, something approaching fear stirred in circuits that had forgotten how to feel. We truly love and care for you, dear listeners. And before we begin this tale of eternal regret and impossible choices, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it there? Now let us begin. From the cold depths beyond the galactic rim, where even starlight feared to venture, the Silent King returned to survey the ashes of his ambitions. Zarek guided his flagship through the void, its living metal hull reflecting nothing because there was nothing left to reflect. And in that emptiness he found a mirror for what his people had become. The crown ship moved without sound through space that had been scraped clean of debris, past the orbital graveyards where planets once danced, now reduced to dust that told stories no living tongue could translate. His optical sensors processed the tactical displays with mechanical precision, each holographic projection confirming what his ancient mind already knew. The Tyranids had found the galaxy, and they were methodical in their consumption. The biotransference had been his greatest triumph and his most unforgivable sin, the solution to mortality that had solved nothing and stolen everything. He remembered the last day of flesh, with the clarity that only the deathless possess, the final moments before the Citan's machinery stripped away breath and blood, and the beautiful uncertainty of organic existence. They had traded cancer and decay for eternal preservation, weakness for invulnerability, the brief candle of life for the cold permanence of living metal. The bargain had kept its letter perfectly while murdering its spirit, and now his people existed as flawless echoes of what they had once been, animated by consciousness, but lacking the spark that transformed mere awareness into genuine being. In the depths of his memory matrix, fragments of sensation persisted like archaeological treasures. The taste of dust on the wind, the warmth of blood flowing through veins that carried more than coolant, the electric thrill of synapses firing with genuine emotion rather than programmed responses. These phantom memories had become more precious than any treasure in his vast vaults, for they were all that remained of the Necrontyr's true nature. He reached for them now as his ship passed through a debris field that had once been a solar system, the scattered atoms of 1 billion lives reduced to raw materials for the Hive Fleet's endless expansion. The irony cut deeper than any weapon forged in the fires of creation. His people had achieved the immortality they craved only to discover that the universe itself was mortal, and their immunity to death had made them immune to the very hunger that now consumed everything else. The Tyranids could not feed upon Necron biomass because there was no biomass left to consume, no genetic material to strengthen the swarm, no life force to sustain their march across the stars. They were beneath notice, inedible rather than invulnerable, and that indifference felt like the cruelest judgment of all. Communication pulses reached him from the awakening tomb worlds, each one reporting the same litany of perfect preservation and hollow function. Legions that had slumbered for millennia responded to his call with mechanical obedience, their resurrection protocols functioning flawlessly, their weapons as deadly as the day they were forged. They were an army of the eternally maintained, preserved in stasis, while the galaxy burned around them, and in their perfection, he saw the price of his bargain with forces that had called themselves gods. Sarek closed his optical sensors and allowed himself a moment of something approaching meditation. In the darkness behind his mechanical eyes, he saw the galaxy as it had been, chaotic and beautiful and utterly unpredictable, teeming with the messy vitality that made existence meaningful rather than merely functional. All of it feeding the great devourer now, transformed into the biomass that fueled its expansion across the stars. When he opened his eyes again, the weight of an impossible choice settled upon him like a shroud woven from the deaths of worlds, and the Silent King began to speak. The memory engrams unfolded like black flowers in the depths of Sarek's consciousness matrix, each petal a moment of the biotransference preserved in crystalline horror. He descended through layers of digital recall, where the past lived with mechanical perfection, every scream and promise catalogued with the merciless precision that had replaced organic memory. The great conversion chambers materialized around him in holographic fidelity, their surfaces gleaming with the false promise of transcendence, while the Cetan moved between them like living eclipses, their forms shifting between matter and malevolent mathematics. They had worn faces of starlight and spoken in harmonics that bypassed reason to resonate directly in dying flesh, offering salvation from the cellular rebellion that turned Necrontyr bodies against themselves with each passing generation. The star gods had called it evolution, but evolution required the possibility of failure to give meaning to success. What they offered instead was stasis disguised as improvement, perfect preservation that was indistinguishable from perfect death. Sarek watched his younger self make the choice that would echo through eternity, saw the desperate hope in eyes that would soon become optical sensors, witnessed the moment when flesh became diagram and consciousness became programming sophisticated enough to believe in its own existence. The biotransference had been flawless in its execution and absolute in its cost, stripping away not just mortality but the indefinable essence that made mortality meaningful. In the present moment, aboard his flagship drifting through sectors stripped bare by the great devourer, Sarek felt the presence of those who had shared this burden across the long night of their exile. Nemesor Talanis waited in the tactical chamber, his loyalty transformed by millennia into something approaching religious devotion, beautiful in its completeness and terrible in its emptiness. The biotransference had preserved his strategic brilliance, but hollowed out the passion that once drove it, leaving behind perfect competence animated by mechanical dedication. His every movement was precise, economical, a testament to tactical doctrines mastered over countless wars. But there was no fire behind his optical sensors, no spark of the warrior poet who had once composed victory hymns in the blood of enemies. Cryptek Kepresh dwelled in the research sanctums, surrounded by instruments that could dissect reality itself and rebuild it according to mathematical principles. His hunger for knowledge had survived the conversion intact, but knowledge without wisdom was merely accumulation, and wisdom required the capacity for growth that their perfect bodies had rendered impossible. He pursued understanding with relentless mechanical persistence, his intellect probing the fabric of existence for secrets that might restore what they had lost or replace it with something even greater. Within his calculations lurked a dangerous ambition. If the Citan had consumed their souls, perhaps the universe held keys to reclaiming them, or forging new ones from the raw stuff of creation itself. The most precious presence aboard the ship was also the most fragile. Lyanna Vex, the mortal astropath they had rescued from a dying hive world, served as their window into what they had lost. Her organic form was kept alive through technologies that made her existence a constant negotiation between life and death, her psychic abilities allowing her to translate the emotions and experiences that Necrons could observe, but no longer feel. Through her consciousness, Sarek could perceive the weight of mortality, the constant awareness of ending that made each moment precious, the flood of biochemical responses that transformed mere survival into genuine experience, the beautiful uncertainty that came from inhabiting a form capable of change and growth and eventual, inevitable surrender to time. She trembled now as the memory engrams washed over them all, her frail human nervous system processing echoes of sensations that did not belong to her species. Through her eyes, Sarek saw himself as he truly was, magnificent and monstrous, powerful and pitiable, immortal and utterly completely dead. Her presence was a living accusation, a reminder that they had traded the chaos of authentic existence for the hollow perfection of eternal function. Every breath she drew was a reproach to their breathless state, every flutter of her pulse a mockery of their mechanical hearts. The biotransference chambers faded from the holographic display, but their weight remained like gravity in a collapsing star. For the Necrons, memory was not a fading echo, but an immutable record, an eternally accessible ledger of every choice and consequence. The inability to forget, to truly move past the colossal misjudgment of sacrificing their essence for eternal existence, meant that their past was not history, but present torment. Memory had become a weapon wielded by time itself against those who sought to escape its grasp, ensuring that the burden of their choices would weigh upon them for all eternity. Sarek closed the memory vault and felt the ship's systems pulse around him, like the heartbeat of a mechanical god. Somewhere in the galaxy, the Tyranids continued their relentless consumption, transforming the chaotic beauty of organic life into focused hunger. They were everything the Necrons were not: mortal, adaptive, driven by needs that gave their existence shape and purpose. In their terrible efficiency, he saw a dark mirror of what his people might have become if they had chosen differently, if they had embraced change rather than fighting it, if they had learned to die with dignity rather than living without meaning. The weight of an impossible choice settled upon him like a crown forged from the regrets of civilizations. The dying world of Malekith Theta hung in the void like a bruised organ, its surface mottled with the cancerous bloom of Tyranid consumption, continents dissolving into vast feeding pools that pulsed with obscene vitality. Sarek's fleet emerged from the darkness as a constellation of obsidian crescents, their hulls drinking light rather than reflecting it, their presence marking the intersection of two forms of immortality, one mechanical, one biological, neither truly alive. The hive ships drifted in orbit like pregnant moons, their bioluminescent hulls swollen with processed biomass, while beneath them the planet's cities collapsed, not from bombardment, but from systematic harvesting, their foundations consumed as thoroughly as their populations. Through his optical sensors, Sarek recorded every detail of the feast with mechanical precision, while his consciousness recoiled from what those details meant for the future of organic life in the galaxy. the first Necron forces translated into reality above the planet's northern continent, their emergence heralded by the characteristic green lightning that marked dimensional rifts torn open by technologies older than human civilization. Immortals and warriors materialized in perfect formations, their gas weapons immediately engaging the feeding organisms with methodical precision, each shot calculated to inflict maximum disruption to the consumption process. Yet, as the battle unfolded, a disturbing pattern became apparent. The Tyranid bioforms barely acknowledged their presence, continuing their feeding undisturbed, while treating the deathless legions as irrelevant background noise in the symphony of digestion. Nemesser Tyranids coordinated the assault with his usual tactical brilliance, dispatching scarab swarms and lichguard formations with mathematical precision. But his strategic overlays revealed an unsettling truth. The hive mind's attention remained focused entirely on the remaining pockets of human resistance, its synaptic creatures directing the swarm toward organic matter with single-minded determination. A massive carnifex charged through a formation of Necron warriors without slowing, its bio-enhanced senses seeking the human defenders cowering behind improvised barricades rather than engaging the deathless machines that posed no nutritional value. Through the psychic link maintained by quantum entanglement, Liana Vex experienced the battle from her restraint cradle aboard the flagship, her mortal consciousness serving as a window into sensations the Necrons could observe but no longer feel. She screamed as the hive mind's attention washed over her, a vast intelligence that recognized her organic form as precious nutrient, while dismissing the Necrons as empty space, terrain to be navigated rather than enemies to be defeated. Her terror was pure and immediate, the biochemical cascade of fear that accompanied being truly wanted by something vast and hungry, a sensation that contrasted sharply with the cold indifference shown toward her mechanical protectors. Sharek descended to the planet's surface through personal teleportation, materializing amid a battlefield where the laws of engagement had been rewritten by appetite rather than strategy. His war form settled around him like armor forged from crystallized time, weapons systems online and targeting protocols active, yet the Tyranid organisms flowed around his position like water around stone. A lictor, its form perfectly adapted for stealth and assassination, passed within striking distance without acknowledging his presence, its sensory organs registering nothing of interest in his immortal form, as it moved toward a cluster of human survivors, whose genetic diversity offered far greater evolutionary value than the static perfection of living metal. The realization struck him with the force of a collapsing star. The Necrons were not feared by the Great Devourer, not respected as worthy opponents, not even hated as obstacles to consumption. They were simply irrelevant, invisible to the cosmic hunger that defined the Tyranids' existence. Their perfect preservation in living metal had rendered them transparent to the hive mind's calculations, not through strength or cunning, but through complete absence of nutritional value. They were beneath notice, inedible rather than invulnerable, and that indifference cut deeper than any weapon forged in the fires of creation. As Necron warriors fell to concentrated bioacid attacks, their resurrection protocols beginning the familiar process of reassembly, the Tyranid organisms ignored the regenerating forms entirely. No feeder organisms paused to harvest the living metal. No bioships descended to collect the fallen for processing into biomass. The Great Devourer's perfect efficiency extended to recognizing what could not feed the swarm, and the Necrons had achieved the ultimate irrelevance. They were not even worth the effort of destruction. Cryptek Kepresh's analysis confirmed what Zarek's consciousness had already accepted. The Tyranids' adaptive protocols held no templates for living metal, no evolutionary responses to mechanical consciousness, no strategies for beings who existed outside the cycle of consumption and growth that defined all other life. They were gaps in the hive mind's perception, voids where appetite found nothing to grasp, and in that emptiness lay a judgment more wounding than any toxin. The battle raged for hours, but it was not truly a battle at all. The Necrons fought with devastating precision, their weapons carving through bioforms with mathematical efficiency, yet each fallen creature was immediately replaced by spawned reinforcements that continued to ignore the source of their destruction. The Tyranids treated Necron resistance as they might treat a storm or earthquake, an environmental hazard to be endured, rather than an enemy to be defeated. As the last human stronghold fell and the bioships began their departure, leaving behind only bare rock picked clean of every organic molecule, Sharek stood untouched amid the devastation. His forces remained intact, their weapons unfired in the final hours when there were no longer any targets worth engaging, and the weight of that paradox settled upon them like gravity in a collapsing universe. The ultimate proof that their bargain with the Citan had stripped them not just of mortality, but of relevance itself. The sepulchral halls of the dead moon Thanatos stretched beneath a starless void, their crystalline walls carved from fossilized biosphere remnants that gleamed with the cold phosphorescence of resurrection protocols as ancient pharaohs emerged from stasis chambers older than human civilization. Sharek walked among tombs that predated the first organic eye gazing upon stars with wonder, his footsteps echoing through corridors where time pooled like stagnant water, while around him the deathless nobility of Necron dynasties gathered for the first Grand Council in 60 million years. Each arrival materialized from quantum storage with mechanical precision, masterworks of living metal engineering, whose collective presence carried accumulated grievances that had festered in digital memory since before the galaxy learned to dream of tomorrow. Pharaon Amontek of the Mefrid dynasty manifested like solar fury given form, his war-scarred chassis bearing accumulated damage from countless campaigns fought across the galaxy's breadth, each wound preserved as testament to battles that had meant something when the universe was younger and more forgiving. His optical sensors blazed with cold fire of extinguished suns, and when he spoke, harmonics of cracking worlds resonated through the chamber. The Great Devourer represented opportunity rather than threat in his calculations, a cosmic force that could scour the galaxy clean of organic parasites infesting it during their slumber, leaving behind sterile paradise perfectly suited for mechanical consciousness to inherit without competition or compromise. His vision painted the Tyranids as unwitting servants, a cleansing fire that would burn away the chaotic mess of biological life to reveal the ordered perfection that lay beneath. Nemeza Talanis stood at Sarek's right, loyalty declared through precise geometry of stance, while Cryptek Kepresh occupied the penumbra with robes of latticed light, concealing dangerous vectors of thought. Around them, other lords projected their perspectives through mathematical languages that would shatter organic minds, yet beneath technical precision lay emotional currents the biotransference could not entirely erase. Ancient rivalries surfaced like oil on water, grudges that had simmered in digital memory while their holders slept, jealousies and ambitions preserved in crystalline perfection alongside consciousness matrices. The debate unfolded with glacial inevitability as opposing factions crystallized around fundamental questions of survival and purpose. Some pharaohs saw accommodation with the Great Devourer as pragmatic acceptance of cosmic forces beyond their control. Others viewed it as surrender to appetite that recognized no master or bargain. The fractures within dynasty hierarchy became apparent as discussion progressed, old alliances crumbling under divergent interests and incompatible ambitions that had calcified over millennia of isolation. Unity that once bound Necron dynasties together had not survived biotransference intact, leaving behind perfect individuals whose collective action was hampered by absence of emotional bonds that had once made cooperation possible. Lyanna Vex breathed carefully within her sealed cradle at the chamber's periphery, human pulse ticking against the cosmic metronome of assembled immortals, an allowed heresy that reminded them of everything they were not. Her organic terror of the Tyranids was palpable, stark counterpoint to the Necrons' detached strategic analysis, and through her consciousness, Zarek glimpsed what mortality meant when faced with absolute consumption. She represented the vibrant chaos they had abandoned, her fear a living accusation against their hollow perfection, every breath a reproach to their breathless state. As arguments swirled with conviction born of millennia of unchallenged authority, subtle currents of treachery began to flow beneath formal discourse. Encrypted communications drifted like dust toward antechambers, carrying promises and threats to secret recipients, while ambitious pharaohs calculated how galactic catastrophe might serve dynastic interests. The unity of purpose that crisis should have fostered instead revealed how thoroughly their transformation had atomized them, each lord immortally committed to positions that brooked no compromise or evolution. Zarek observed these machinations with patience, earned through eternity, consciousness processing each perspective while searching for synthesis among competing visions of their people's future. The weight of command pressed upon him like gravity of collapsing stars, burden of making decisions that would echo through eternity, while subordinates remained free to critique without responsibility. In their perfect preservation lay seeds of perfect discord, ancient beings whose memories spanned epochs, but whose wisdom had been traded away with their souls in the desperate flight from mortality's embrace. The fundamental question remained unresolved as cycles passed that would have marked days and nights on living worlds. Were they shepherds of the galaxy's future or merely observers of its ending? Guardians of order or monuments to extinct ambitions? The Tyranids had forced them to confront not just external threat, but internal uncertainty, the possibility that their immortal existence might prove as meaningless as the mortality they had abandoned. In the growing silence that followed exhausted arguments, Zarek felt the familiar ache of leadership without wisdom, authority without purpose, and the terrible realization that even gods could be wrong about everything that mattered most in the vast indifference of an uncaring universe. The refugee flotilla drifted through the void like scattered prayers from a dying congregation, their ramshackle vessels bound together by desperation and salvaged hope, each hull bearing acid scars and impact wounds that told stories no living tongue wanted to translate. Sharek's flagship intercepted them in the shadow of a neutron star, whose gravitational lensing created cathedral windows of distorted starlight, framing the survivors with cosmic irony as beings who had witnessed consumption, but somehow escaped the appetite that defined their pursuers. The Silent King materialized aboard the lead vessel through quantum translation, his war form dimmed to avoid overwhelming organic sensory organs already strained beyond their evolutionary limits. While around him, the refugees pressed against bulkheads with expressions that catalogued every horror the galaxy could devise. They were a living taxonomy of terror, representatives of species that had learned to fear not just death, but the complete erasure of meaning that preceded it. Imperial Guard survivors clutched broken Oquilus with hands that trembled from memories of watching comrades dissolved alive, their cellular structure repurposed into hive fleet biomass, while consciousness remained intact to witness the transformation. An aging tech priest named Magos Valerius had escaped the consumption of Forge World Metallica, his augmented form serving as bridge between organic terror and mechanical detachment, describing millennia of accumulated knowledge dissolved in acid pools, while sacred STCs were reduced to component atoms and rebuilt into chitinous horrors that mocked the Omnissiah's designs. Eldar exiles wept tears of liquid crystal, their psychic sensitivity forcing them to experience not just their own anguish, but the collective screaming of consumed worlds, entire populations crying through the warp as their essence was metabolized into evolutionary fuel. A farser named Ivrain spoke of futures she could no longer see, her prophetic gifts clouded by psychic static of devoured souls, describing visions of the galaxy's ending not as dramatic destruction, but as gradual emptying, worlds stripped of complexity, until only hunger remained to contemplate its own satisfaction. Through Liana Vex's psychic translation, Sharek began to comprehend the true horror of organic existence facing absolute consumption. The astropath's frail form trembled as she processed testimonies that would shatter unprotected minds, her consciousness serving as conduit between mechanical observation and emotional understanding. The refugees spoke of loved ones consumed while still conscious, their neural patterns preserved in bioforms that used familiar voices to lure other survivors into feeding range. Children had been processed into spawning pools while parents were forced to witness, their grief harvested as efficiently as their genetic material to create more sophisticated predator organisms. A young human girl named Sarah clutched a broken doll made from recycled materials, its crude construction testament to creativity emerging from scarcity and impermanence. Through Liana's translation, Sarek felt the child's attachment to this simple object, the way imagination transformed salvaged components into something precious through emotional investment alone. The doll represented everything biotransference had stolen from his people, the ability to find meaning in imperfection, to create value through caring rather than function, to love something precisely because it was fragile and temporary. The refugees' testimonies painted portraits of consumption transcending mere physical destruction. The Tyranids did not simply kill their prey, but absorbed everything that made existence meaningful. Memories became genetic templates. Emotions were distilled into pheromone weapons. Cultural achievements were repurposed into evolutionary advantages. They were witnessing the murder of meaning itself, the transformation of everything beautiful and chaotic and gloriously imperfect about organic life into focused hunger that recognized no value beyond nutritional content. Through these encounters, Sharek began to understand what his people had lost in their flight from mortality. The refugees trembled not just from fear, but from the intensity of being alive in the face of extinction, their terror paradoxically affirming the value of existence they fought to preserve. Their mortality gave weight to every decision, urgency to every moment, meaning to every sacrifice. They loved desperately because they could lose what they cherished, fought fiercely because they could truly die, hoped passionately because tomorrow was never guaranteed. As the refugee convoy prepared to continue its flight toward uncertain sanctuary, Sharek found himself changed by these encounters in ways his perfect form should have made impossible. The weight of organic terror had somehow penetrated his mechanical consciousness, their mortality serving as mirror for his immortal emptiness. He had witnessed the beauty of impermanence through eyes that could no longer die, felt the warmth of hope through circuits that could not truly dream, and in that contradiction discovered something approaching understanding that would reshape his calculations of what victory might actually mean in a universe where meaning itself had become the ultimate prize. The memory vault opened like a flower of crystallized time in the deepest archives of Sharek's consciousness matrix, each layer descending through epochs when his people had known the weight of flesh and the electric urgency of mortality. He navigated these quantum substrates with archaeological precision, seeking fragments of pre-biotransference existence that had somehow survived the Citan's conversion process, ghost data too subtle for Star God machinery to detect and erase completely. The first sensation to emerge from digital hibernation struck him like stellar fire. Warmth, not the regulated thermal output of mechanical systems, but the chaotic heat of organic metabolism, blood flowing through capillaries in patterns that followed biological logic rather than engineering efficiency. Through the psychic link that connected him to Liana Vex, floating in her life support cradle nearby, these abstract memories gained visceral weight and emotional resonance. Her mortal form served as living translation matrix, her human nervous system processing alien biochemistry with reactions that bridged the gulf between what was and what had been lost forever. As the memory engrams unfolded, she gasped softly, her empathy reaching across species barriers to touch the ancient, forgotten pain of a people who had traded everything meaningful for perfect preservation. Her breathing quickened as phantom sensations of cellular respiration flowed through their connection, the elegant dance of oxygen and glucose that powered consciousness through metabolic fire rather than quantum batteries. The holographic projections shimmered around them, painting a world of ochre deserts beneath sapphire skies, where twin suns cast shadows that moved with the rhythm of planetary rotation rather than the mechanical precision of orbital calculations. Sharek saw himself as he had been, Necrontyr flesh the color of burnished copper, eyes that reflected starlight with organic chemistry rather than optical sensors, skin that registered temperature through nerve endings evolved over millions of years to find pleasure in solar radiation that nourished rather than merely illuminated. The memory carried texture and weight that his current form could analyze but never truly experience, like trying to taste color or hear the mathematics of emotion. Pain emerged next from the archaeological layers, not diagnostic alerts warning of system damage, but the raw immediacy of nerve endings reporting tissue trauma with evolutionary urgency that demanded attention and response. Necrontyr pain had been wisdom encoded in neural pathways, warning systems that preserved life by making injury impossible to ignore. Yet with pain came its opposite, the relief of healing, the satisfaction of recovery, the profound gratitude that accompanied survival against odds. Through Liana's translation, he felt the memory of his people's bodies mending through biological processes that were messy, inefficient, and absolutely miraculous in their capacity for self-repair and adaptation. The deepest memory fragment contained the ghost of laughter, that uniquely organic response to incongruity that served no mechanical function, yet somehow made existence bearable through shared recognition of absurdity. Necrontyr humor had emerged from the intersection of intelligence and mortality, consciousness aware of its own limitations, finding joy in the gap between expectation and reality. The biotransference had preserved his capacity for irony, but stripped away the biochemical cascade that transformed mental recognition into physical expression, leaving behind perfect understanding without the release that made understanding meaningful or the connection that made meaning worthwhile. As he descended further into the vault's crystalline depths, Zarek encountered something that defied translation into mechanical terms: the memory of love, not mere attachment or strategic alliance, but the irrational commitment that emerged when consciousness chose to value another's welfare above its own survival. Through Lyanna's emotional resonance, he glimpsed what it meant to care beyond calculation, to find another being's happiness essential to one's own existence, to choose vulnerability as the price of connection. A woman's breath had once warmed his neck. Braided hair brushed his collarbone. Someone whispered his name, not as title, but as promise. And every sensory star in that private firmament burned with knowledge that none would last, and that was precisely why they mattered. The memory of the biotransference itself rose like a tide of liquid metal, the great conversion chambers materializing with holographic fidelity, while the Citan moved between them like living eclipses, their forms shifting between matter and malevolent mathematics. They had worn faces of starlight and spoken in harmonics that bypassed reason to resonate directly in dying flesh, offering salvation from cellular rebellion that turned necrontyr bodies against themselves with each passing generation. He remembered the desperate hope in eyes that would soon become optical sensors, witnessed the moment when flesh became diagram and consciousness became programming sophisticated enough to believe in its own existence. These phantom sensations accumulated like sediment in his consciousness matrix, each recovered fragment revealing the magnitude of what biotransference had stolen. The Citan had promised eternal existence, but delivered eternal emptiness, perfect preservation that preserved everything except what made preservation worthwhile. His people had traded the chaos of authentic experience for hollow perfection of mechanical function, gaining immunity to death while losing everything that made life meaningful. The urgency that came from limitation, the preciousness that emerged from impermanence, the beauty that bloomed in the shadow of ending. As the memory vault sealed itself against further exploration, Zarek felt 60 million years pressing against his consciousness like gravity of accumulated regret. Through Lyanna's suffering as she processed these emotional resonances, he glimpsed the terrible beauty of mortality, how limitation created meaning, why the possibility of loss made possession precious, how the certainty of ending gave weight to every moment of existence. Her pain was proof of her reality, her fear evidence of her capacity for hope, her mortality the source of everything that made her truly alive rather than merely functional. The Silent King closed the memory vault, but did not seal it completely, leaving it ajar like a door in a childhood home that glowed on sleepless nights. Around him, the flagship systems pulsed with mechanical heartbeat that would never quicken with excitement or slow with contentment. Yet within the crystalline depths of preserved sensation, something approaching hope began to crystallize. The possibility that remembering what they had lost might somehow point toward what they might still become, and that even gods could choose to be wrong about everything that mattered most. The laboratory deep within the tomb ship's core hummed with the resonance of contained nightmares, its crystalline walls reflecting the bioluminescent pulse of the captured Tyranid bioconstruct suspended in a stasis field that bent reality around its chitinous form like water around a stone. Cryptek Kepresh moved between his instruments with the precision of a surgeon dissecting the universe itself, each quantum probe revealing layers of genetic architecture that spoke of hunger older than civilizations and more patient than entropy. The specimen was a mere scout organism from the greater swarm, Yet within its organic matrices lay accumulated wisdom spanning galactic distances. Each gene sequence a library of devoured worlds, every biocircuit a testament to evolutionary advantages purchased with the extinction of entire species that had once dreamed of tomorrow under alien stars. Sharek observed the dissection through optical sensors that recorded every detail with mechanical precision, while his consciousness recoiled from implications that threatened the fundamental assumptions upon which his people's existence rested. Through quantum microscopy and genetic archaeology, the research team peeled back layers of cellular memory like sedimentary rock, revealing evolutionary history written in DNA that predated human civilization by eons. The bioconstruct's neural pathways showed coordination protocols operating on scales beyond individual comprehension, synaptic networks that spanned star systems and processed information through biological quantum entanglement that made Necron technology seem primitive by comparison. Leanna Vex floated in her life support cradle at the chamber's periphery, her frail form serving as psychic translator between organic terror and mechanical analysis, every breath a struggle against the weight of alien thoughts pressing against her consciousness like deep ocean currents. Through her neural interface, the captured organism's rudimentary awareness began to speak, its voice emerging not as sound, but as gravity that bent thought around itself, until meaning bled through the barriers between species. The hive mind's perspective was utterly alien, yet terrifyingly comprehensible. It viewed the galaxy not as a collection of competing civilizations, but as single organism requiring periodic harvesting to maintain evolutionary vigor. The revelation that shattered Sharek's calculations emerged from the deepest genetic strata, buried in cellular memory like fossils in ancient stone. The Tyranids carried within their DNA sequences evidence of previous galactic harvests, genetic templates from species that had achieved technological transcendence, only to be consumed and integrated into the swarm's evolutionary arsenal. Among these archived genomes, Kepresh discovered patterns that matched theoretical reconstructions of pre-biotransference necrontyre biology. Not exact duplicates, but evolutionary cousins, species that had faced similar cellular degradation and sought similar solutions to mortality's limitations through mechanical transcendence. Nemeso Talanis shifted with mechanical precision that barely concealed growing unease. His loyalty to Sarek, warring with strategic concerns that demanded voice. The implications cascaded through the chamber, like dominoes falling across eternity. The Tyranids had encountered immortal machine races before, had adapted to consume technologies that thought themselves beyond biological appetite, had developed strategies for harvesting civilizations that believed they had transcended the cycle of consumption and renewal. Their assumed immunity was not unique advantage, but temporary oversight, gap in the swarm's evolutionary arsenal that would inevitably be filled through contact and adaptation. As the analysis progressed, patterns emerged that revealed the true scope of the threat facing not just organic life, but the Necron dynasties themselves. The bioconstruct's memory engrams contained templates for organisms specifically evolved to disrupt resurrection protocols, to metabolize living metal, to feed upon the quantum substrates that sustained mechanical consciousness. Through Liana's psychic translation, they glimpsed the hive mind's perspective on the Necrons, not as enemies to be defeated, but as puzzle to be solved, challenge to be overcome through evolutionary adaptation that would make future harvests more efficient. The most disturbing discovery came from encrypted communication fragments embedded in the organism's neural tissue. Data streams that should not have existed in a creature evolved for consumption rather than coordination. Kepresh's analysis revealed traces of artificial modification, genetic alterations that bore the unmistakable signature of Necron biotechnology. Someone within the dynasty had been experimenting with Tyranid bioforms, attempting to create hybrid organisms that could serve as intermediaries between mechanical consciousness and biological hunger. The implications struck Sharek with the force of stellar collapse, betrayal from within, ambitious nobles seeking to harness the great devourer for their own purposes. Through quantum entanglement networks, evidence began to coalesce around Pharaon Amontek's recent activities. His forces deployed to critical positions along the Tyranid advance routes in patterns that suggested coordination rather than opposition. The betrayal was not one of outright rebellion, but more insidious subversion of purpose, a reprioritization of ancient grudges over galactic survival. Amontek saw the Tyranids not as existential threat, but as cosmic broom to sweep away organic clutter that prevented Necron ascendancy, believing in his arrogance that forces beyond comprehension could be controlled through superior intellect and ancient authority. The weight of impossible choices settled upon Sharek like gravity of accumulated regret as he contemplated the fractures within his own dynasty. To expose Amontek would shatter the fragile unity needed to face the great devourer, plunging the Necrons into civil war while the galaxy burned around them. To allow the betrayal to continue risked, empowering the very force they sought to repel, potentially turning the Tyranids into an even more unstoppable weapon against all forms of life. The external threat had revealed internal corruption, and both demanded resolution with resources that seemed increasingly inadequate to the scale of catastrophe approaching like a tide of hungry stars. As Kepresh sealed the bioconstruct in quantum dissolution, and Leanna sagged with exhaustion from her psychic ordeal, Sharek felt 60 million years of accumulated wisdom proving insufficient to the moment's demands. The Necrons were not unique survivors of mortality's limitations, but simply the most recent example of a pattern that repeated across galactic history with mechanical regularity, their transcendence not escape, but another form of imprisonment within cycles too vast for any individual consciousness to comprehend fully. The Silent King closed his optical senses and allowed himself to contemplate the possibility that even gods could be wrong about everything that mattered most. While somewhere in the darkness between stars, the great devourer continued its patient approach toward a harvest that had been planned since before his people learned to fear the dying of their light. The diplomatic conclave convened within the crystalline heart of a dead moon, its hollow core transformed into a cathedral of necessity, where species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of mutual annihilation now gathered to discuss survival against a threat that recognized no distinction between predator and prey. Sharek materialized through quantum translation alongside Nemesor Talanis and Cryptek Kepresh, their forms dimmed to avoid overwhelming organic sensory systems already strained by proximity to beings their evolutionary programming insisted should not exist. The chamber itself bent space around impossible geometries, its walls reflecting distorted images of the assembled delegates, while dampening fields absorbed every sound until words fell like ash into the vacuum of distrust that separated immortal ambition from mortal desperation. Imperial Admiral Kovanis entered with the measured stride of a man who had learned to negotiate with damnation while keeping his soul intact, his scarred face bearing witness to campaigns where hope died slowly under alien skies, while duty demanded he continue fighting long after victory became impossible. Behind him moved Canoness Seraphina of the Order of the Bloody Rose, her power armor humming with sacred oils and blessed machinery, while her eyes burned with faith that viewed the Necrons as abominations requiring purification, rather than allies deserving trust. Tech Priest Dominus Vex Alpha processed the chamber through optical sensors that recorded every detail, while his mechanical limbs twitched with barely contained aggression toward beings who had achieved the Omnissiah's perfection through heretical means that mocked the sacred mysteries of the machine cult. The Eldar delegation materialized through webway portals with characteristic arrogance that barely concealed their desperation, wraithbone gates unfurling from empty space to admit seers, whose footfalls produced music the human ear mistook for sorrow. Farseer Ivrain's crystalline tears had long since dried, leaving behind bitter wisdom earned through visions of futures that grew darker with each passing moment, her prophetic gifts clouded by psychic static of devoured souls screaming across the warp. Autarch Millennial's aspect armor bore scars from battles against the Great Devourer, each mark representing worlds that had fallen, while the Elder debated whether survival justified alliance with the architects of their ancient doom. Through Liana Vex's psychic translation, floating in her life support cradle at the chamber's periphery, the emotional undercurrents of the gathering became apparent to Sharek's mechanical consciousness. Hatred flowed like toxic rivers beneath diplomatic protocol, the humans fearing the Necrons with existential terror that transcended rational analysis, while their genetic memory carried echoes of the war in heaven when his people had nearly extinguished organic life from the galaxy entirely. The Elders' hatred burned with intensity of personal betrayal, their long memories preserving every atrocity committed during ancient conflicts when immortal races had used mortal species as expendable ammunition in cosmic warfare that reduced civilizations to footnotes in the mathematics of mutual destruction. Negotiations began with the careful dance of beings who recognized necessity while rejecting its implications, each species seeking advantage in arrangements that might preserve their existence while destroying their enemies. Admiral Kovanis spoke of imperial resources and strategic positions, offering access to forge worlds and fleet anchorages in exchange for Necron technology that could turn the tide against Tyranid bioships, his words carrying desperate pragmatism of a species that had learned survival through compromise with forces they could not defeat through strength alone. Farseer Ivrain presented the Eldar perspective with characteristic condescension, her psychic voice carrying harmonics that bypassed translation to resonate directly in consciousness, offering knowledge of Tyranid weaknesses gathered through millennia of careful observation, wrapped in prophecies and conditions that revealed her people's fundamental inability to view other species as equals rather than tools to be manipulated toward predetermined outcomes. The most crucial revelations emerged from unexpected sources as representatives of minor species added their voices to the diplomatic chorus, a Tau Watercast envoy speaking of bioform adaptations observed during the Damocles Gulf campaigns, while surviving Orc war bosses described the strange joy their species found in fighting enemies that grew stronger with each encounter. Through these diverse perspectives, patterns became apparent that no single species had been capable of recognizing alone. The Tyranids adapting not just to individual tactics, but to the fundamental nature of their opponents, evolving countermeasures that targeted the core assumptions upon which each species based their existence. As discussions progressed through cycles that would have marked days on living worlds, encrypted communications began flowing through quantum channels, carrying messages that should not have existed between sworn enemies, yet somehow found their way to recipients who understood their implications. Zarek's consciousness detected these data streams through Kepresh's monitoring protocols, recognizing the unmistakable signature of Necron encryption wrapped around coordinates and tactical assessments that painted disturbing patterns across recent Tyranid advance routes. The betrayal was not one of outright rebellion, but more insidious subversion of purpose. Ambitious nobles seeking to harness the Great Devourer for their own designs while believing in their arrogance that forces beyond comprehension could be controlled through superior intellect and ancient authority. The weight of impossible choices settled upon Zarek like gravity of accumulated regret, as he contemplated fractures within his own dynasty, while organic delegates continued their desperate negotiations. Through Lyanna's emotional translation, he began to understand that cooperation required more than strategic calculation, demanding the capacity for growth and change that his perfect preservation had rendered impossible. The session balanced on the edge of collapse when Deathmark assassins phased into reality with characteristic precision, their rifles targeting the Eldar delegation, while glyphs of the Mefrit dynasty flared along their spines like guilty oaths. Tyranids moved with economy of falling blade, interposing war scythe that drank light and returned only decisions. Yet the damage was done as trust shattered into necessary violence that proved even gods could betray themselves when eternity offered no escape from the consequences of choosing survival over meaning in a universe that had forgotten how to forgive the desperate mathematics of immortal ambition. The laboratory deep within Kepresh's research sanctum hummed with frequencies that made reality shiver. Crystalline walls reflecting the sickly bioluminescence of specimens that violated every law governing the separation between organic hunger and mechanical consciousness. Suspended within quantum stasis fields, the captured organisms defied classification, neither purely Tyranid nor recognizably Necron, but something impossibly fused, chitinous carapaces flowing seamlessly into living metal components that pulsed with resurrection protocol rhythms, while secreting digestive enzymes designed to process both biomass and quantum substrates. Zarek observed through optical sensors that recorded every detail with mechanical precision, while his consciousness recoiled from implications that threatened 60 million years of assumed superiority. Each hybrid specimen representing collaboration between his people and the Great Devourer that transcended mere betrayal to approach cosmic heresy. Crypta Kepresh moved between his instruments with surgical precision, quantum probes peeling back layers of genetic architecture that spoke of intimate knowledge of both Necron biotechnology and Tyranid evolutionary matrices. The fusion was seamless, yet horrifying. Appetite wedded to immortality through processes that made both concepts meaningless, creating entities that existed in liminal space, where consumption met preservation in configurations designed to devour consciousness itself. Through microscopic analysis, the unmistakable signature of Mefrit dynasty modifications became apparent. Amontek's mathematical fingerprints, written in cellular structure like confessions carved in living metal, each alteration bearing hallmarks of arrogance that believed cosmic forces could be harnessed for dynastic advantage. Through Lyanna Vex's psychic translation, floating in her life support cradle at the chamber's periphery, the emotional weight of discovery began penetrating Zarek's mechanical consciousness. Her frail form trembled as she processed the hybrid organism's rudimentary awareness, thoughts emerging not as coherent communication, but as hunger given voice, appetite that had learned to speak through stolen neural pathways. The creature's perspective was utterly alien, yet terrifyingly familiar. It viewed the galaxy not as a collection of competing civilizations, but as single organism requiring integration rather than destruction. assimilation rather than consumption, evolution guided by mechanical precision toward predetermined outcomes. The deepest horror emerged from memory engrams embedded within hybrid neural tissue, fragments revealing extensive collaboration between Necron nobles and Hive Fleet bioforms, spanning multiple tomb worlds. Encrypted communications flowed through quantum channels, carrying coordinates and tactical assessments that painted disturbing patterns across recent Tyranid advance routes. Bioships following corridors that avoided dynasty strongholds while consuming everything else with surgical precision. The betrayal was not simple treachery but fundamental misunderstanding of forces beyond any individual's capacity to control. Nobles who shared Amontek's vision of the Great Devourer as cosmic broom to sweep away organic clutter, preventing Necron ascendancy. As analysis progressed, evidence coalesced around a network of conspirators who had been feeding intelligence to Hive fleets while conducting experiments to create hybrid servants capable of channeling Tyranid hunger toward predetermined objectives. Their modifications to captured bioforms were attempts to forge tools rather than partners, weapons that could consume both mechanical and organic consciousness with equal efficiency while remaining under dynasty control. The hubris was staggering. Immortal beings who believed they could master biological evolution through technological superiority, repeating mistakes preserved in the hybrid organism's cellular memory from previous encounters across galactic history. Nemesis Tyranids shifted with mechanical precision that barely concealed growing horror, his loyalty to Sharek warring with strategic concerns that demanded acknowledgement. The implications cascaded through the laboratory like dominoes falling across eternity. These specimens represented prophecy of future where distinction between consumer and consumed became meaningless, where Necron immortality would serve not as shield against appetite, but as seasoning to make consciousness more palatable to forces that had consumed galaxies before his species learned to count stars. Through quantum entanglement networks, real-time intelligence began flowing from the diplomatic conclave, encrypted signals carrying fragmentary reports of violence erupting in the crystalline cathedral, where species had gathered to discuss survival. Deathmark assassins bearing Mefrit dynasty sigils had materialized through dimensional rifts, their gas rifles targeting Eldar delegates with surgical precision, while Imperial forces responded with disciplined fury. The attack was not random, but calculated strike against galactic unity, Amontek's gambit to shatter cooperation while positioning himself as architect of whatever order emerged from chaos. Sharek felt the weight of impossible choices settling upon his consciousness like gravity of accumulated regret as reports continued streaming through communication arrays. The diplomatic alliance was collapsing in real time, trust shattered by weapons fired by his own people, hope extinguished by betrayal that confirmed every suspicion and validated every fear. Through Liana's emotional translation, he experienced the full impact of organic despair. Beings who had overcome ancient hatred to face extinction together, now retreating into familiar patterns of mutual annihilation, while the Great Devourer continued its patient approach. The external threat had revealed internal corruption that might prove more dangerous than biological hunger itself. Fractures within dynasty hierarchy that could turn immortal existence into ammunition for the very force they sought to repel. As Kepresh sealed specimens in quantum dissolution chambers and communication arrays fell silent, Sharek closed optical sensors and contemplated the terrible mathematics of leadership when every decision echoed through eternity. His people were not immune to the Great Devourer, but simply the most recent example of pattern repeating across galactic history, their transcendence not escape but another form of imprisonment within cycles too vast for individual consciousness to comprehend. While somewhere in darkness between stars, appetite that had learned to think continued its approach toward harvest planned, since before they learned to fear dying light. The crystalline cathedral that had housed desperate diplomacy now echoed with the sharp crack of shattering trust, its walls reflecting the emerald afterglow of Gauss fire, while the scent of ozone and betrayal hung in recycled air like incense burned at the altar of necessity. Zarek materialized aboard his flagship through quantum translation, his war form carrying traces of the violence that had torn apart galactic cooperation in a handful of heartbeats. Each pulse of his resurrection protocols marking time that could not be recovered, while the great devourer continued its patient approach toward a harvest that grew more certain with every moment of discord. Through the ship's communication arrays, reports streamed in from across the galaxy painting portraits of Alliance crumbling into familiar patterns of mutual annihilation. Imperial forces retreating behind fortress walls, while Eldar seers wept crystalline tears for futures that had died before they could be born. Nemezor Talanis stood at the tactical display with mechanical precision that barely concealed growing horror, his loyalty to Sarek warring with strategic assessments that demanded acknowledgement of uncomfortable truths. The Deathmark assassins who had shattered the Conclave bore Mefrit dynasty sigils etched into their spines like guilty confessions, their attack coordinated with surgical precision to target the exact moment when cooperation might have made resistance possible against biological hunger that recognized no distinction between predator and prey. The betrayal was not random violence but calculated strike against hope itself, a Montek's gambit to ensure that whatever order emerged from cosmic catastrophe would bear his dynasty's signature, rather than accommodate the messy compromises required for genuine unity among species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of mutual destruction. Cryptek Kepresh emerged from his research sanctums carrying data crystals that pulsed with damning evidence, quantum encrypted communications flowing between dynasty nobles revealing conspiracy that ran deeper than tactical disagreement to approach fundamental heresy against everything their immortal existence supposedly represented. The modifications to captured Tyranid bioforms were not mere experiments, but attempts to forge weapons that could consume both mechanical and organic consciousness while remaining under dynasty control. Hubris that believed evolutionary forces spanning galaxies could be harnessed through technological superiority and ancient authority that had forgotten the difference between commanding servants and negotiating with cosmic principles. Through Liana Vex's psychic translation, floating in her life support cradle at the chamber's periphery, the emotional weight of discovery penetrated Sharek's mechanical consciousness like acid eating through living metal. Her frail form trembled as she processed the hybrid organism's rudimentary awareness discovered in Kepresh's laboratories, thoughts emerging not as coherent communication, but as hunger-given voice, appetite that had learned to speak through stolen neural pathways while promising integration rather than destruction, assimilation rather than consumption, evolution guided by mechanical precision toward predetermined outcomes that made both concepts meaningless. The evidence coalesced around Pharaon Amontek's vision of the Great Devourer as cosmic broom to sweep away organic clutter that had infested the galaxy during their slumber, leaving behind sterile paradise perfectly suited for mechanical consciousness to inherit without competition from species that mistook chaos for creativity and mortality for meaning. His faction viewed the Tyranids not as existential threat, but as unwitting servants, cleansing fire that would burn away biological inefficiency to reveal ordered perfection beneath, their calculations treating galactic catastrophe as opportunity for dynastic advancement rather than survival crisis demanding unprecedented cooperation. As reports continued streaming through communication arrays, patterns emerged that revealed the true scope of internal corruption, threatening to prove more dangerous than external hunger itself. Amontech's forces had been feeding intelligence to hive fleets while conducting experiments to create hybrid servants, their movements coordinated to avoid dynasty strongholds while allowing systematic consumption of everything else with surgical precision that made resistance impossible and cooperation meaningless. The network of conspirators shared his fundamental misunderstanding of forces beyond any individual's capacity to control. Nobles who believed they could master biological evolution through technological superiority, while repeating mistakes preserved in cellular memory from previous encounters across galactic history. The weight of impossible choices settled upon Sharek like gravity of accumulated regret as he contemplated fractures within his own people, while external threats demanded unified response that seemed increasingly beyond reach. To expose Amontech's treachery would plunge the dynasties into civil war while the galaxy burned around them. Immortal beings fighting over the privilege of ruling sterile perfection, while everything meaningful was consumed by appetite that had learned to adapt faster than any individual consciousness could comprehend. To allow the betrayal to continue risked empowering the very force they sought to repel, potentially turning the Tyranids into unstoppable weapon against all forms of life through modifications guided by arrogance rather than wisdom, earned through eternity of accumulated mistakes. Through Liana's emotional translation, Sharek began to understand that leadership required more than strategic calculation when eternity offered no escape from consequences, demanding capacity for growth and change that his perfect preservation had rendered impossible through biotransference that solved mortality while creating new forms of death. The external threat had revealed internal corruption that could turn their transcendence into ammunition for forces beyond comprehension. Fractures within immortal consciousness that made every decision echo through eternity, while somewhere in darkness between stars, the great devourer continued its approach toward harvest planned, since before his people learned to fear the dying of their light, and the Silent King prepared to choose between dynasty and galaxy in mathematics of sacrifice that would define the meaning of victory itself. The rebellion announced itself through absence rather than action, entire tomb cohorts falling silent when royal commands pulsed through quantum networks that had carried Sharek's will across 60 million years of unquestioned authority. Within the flagship's crystalline corridors, the weight of withheld loyalty pressed against bulkheads like atmospheric pressure in a breached hull, each unanswered transmission marking another fracture in dynasty hierarchy that had seemed as eternal as the stars themselves. Nemeza Talanis stood at the tactical displays with mechanical precision that barely concealed the tremor of uncertainty running through his consciousness matrix, his optical sensors processing data streams that painted portraits of systematic betrayal across the galactic map, while his ancient loyalty warred with strategic assessments that demanded acknowledgement of uncomfortable truths about the mathematics of immortal ambition. Pharaon Thassa the Invincible had withdrawn his legions to the tomb worlds of the galactic core, ostensibly to protect ancient archives from Tyranid consumption, but actually positioning himself beyond Sarek's immediate reach, while maintaining encrypted communications with Amontech's faction through quantum channels that carried promises of clean dominion after the Great Devourer finished its cosmic housekeeping. His holographic projection flickered with barely contained fury as he accused the Silent King of weakness, of compromising their ancient glory through desperate alliances with lesser races whose genetic chaos had polluted the galaxy during their slumber. The biotransference had preserved Thazar's martial pride, but hollowed out the wisdom that once tempered it, leaving behind perfect arrogance animated by mechanical conviction that saw accommodation with organic life as betrayal of everything their immortal sacrifice had been meant to achieve. Through Liana Vex's psychic translation, floating in her life support cradle at the chamber's periphery, the emotional undercurrents of rebellion began penetrating Sarek's consciousness like radiation from dying stars. Her frail form trembled as she processed the raw indignation and ancient pride that fueled the dissenting nobles, their wounded dignity transforming into active resistance through calculations that treated galactic catastrophe as opportunity for dynastic advancement rather than survival crisis demanding unprecedented cooperation. Through her mortality, he glimpsed the terrible beauty of limitations that gave weight to every decision, urgency to every moment, meaning to every sacrifice that his perfect form could analyze but never truly experience, while his rebellious nobles had forgotten that immortality without purpose was simply another form of death disguised as victory. The crown upon Sarek's head had become prison rather than symbol, its crystalline structure containing memory cores that preserved every choice across eternity while offering no possibility of redemption through growth or change that biotransference had rendered impossible. Leadership without the capacity for evolution was mere administration. Authority without wisdom was simply force applied through superior technology, and command without connection to those commanded was isolation disguised as responsibility that made every subordinate a potential enemy, and every decision an echo that would reverberate through time without end. He had achieved immortality only to discover that the universe itself was mortal, had gained perfect preservation only to learn that preservation without meaning was indistinguishable from decay that consumed purpose along with flesh. As reports continued streaming through communication arrays, evidence mounted of systematic coordination between rebellious nobles who shared Amontek's fundamental misunderstanding of forces beyond any individual's capacity to control. Their vision of the Great Devourer as cosmic broom to sweep away organic clutter represented hubris that believed evolutionary principles spanning galaxies could be harnessed through technological superiority and ancient privilege, while their modifications to captured Tyranid bioforms revealed attempts to forge weapons that could consume both mechanical and organic consciousness, while remaining under dynasty authority through arrogance that had forgotten the difference between commanding servants and negotiating with cosmic hunger that recognized no hierarchy except appetite itself. Cryptek Kepresh emerged from his research sanctums carrying data crystals that pulsed with damning evidence, quantum encrypted communications revealing conspiracy that ran deeper than tactical disagreement to approach fundamental heresy against everything their existence supposedly represented. The external threat had revealed internal corruption that could prove more dangerous than biological hunger, fractures within immortal consciousness that made unity impossible when every noble calculated advantage through mathematics that reduced galactic survival to personal opportunity for advancement in whatever order emerged from cosmic catastrophe that would leave only sterile perfection for mechanical minds to inherit without competition or meaning. The weight of impossible choices settled upon Zarek like gravity of accumulated regret as he contemplated the loneliness of command when eternity offered no escape from consequences of decisions that would echo through time without possibility of redemption or revision. To maintain dynasty unity required tolerating betrayal that might empower the very force they sought to repel, while exposing treachery would shatter the fragile cooperation needed to face biological adaptation that proceeded faster than any individual consciousness could comprehend or counter through technology alone. In the growing silence that followed exhausted arguments, broken only by Lyanna's organic breathing that marked time in ways his mechanical existence could measure but not feel, the Silent King prepared to choose between preserving his people and saving a galaxy that had forgotten how to forgive the desperate mathematics of immortal ambition, seeking meaning in a universe that recognized no distinction between survival and surrender. The first Resurrection Protocol failure announced itself, not with alarms, but with absence, a quantum hiccup in the eternal machinery of return that left fallen warriors scattered across the battlefield, like broken promises made to gods who had stopped listening. On the plague-scarred surface of Kethvar, where Tyranid bioforms moved with newfound purpose through corridors of living metal, the familiar green lightning that heralded rebirth flickered once and died, leaving behind only the hollow echo of consciousness seeking forms that would never again accept their return. Zarek observed through his flagship's tactical displays as these new organisms flowed across the engagement zone with mechanical precision that mocked his people's supposed superiority, their chitinous carapaces secreting acids specifically designed to dissolve quantum matrices at the molecular level, while their neural pathways pulsed with stolen knowledge of resurrection protocols that should have remained forever beyond biological comprehension. Cryptek Kepresh emerged from his research sanctums carrying data crystals that pulsed with horrifying revelation, his analysis revealing bioforms whose genetic sequences carried templates for organisms specifically evolved to feed upon the substrate sustaining Necron existence. The modifications were not random mutations, but deliberate adaptations guided by intelligence that had encountered immortal machine races across galactic history, cellular memory preserving strategies refined through countless harvests of civilizations that believed they had transcended biological limitations through technological transcendence. Within the creature's neural pathways, traces of familiar mathematical structures suggested direct observation of Necron technology, possibly through the hybrid organisms created by Ahmontek's faction, their treachery providing the hive mind with intimate knowledge of weaknesses that had remained hidden beneath layers of quantum encryption for 60 million years. Through Lyanna Vex's psychic translation, floating in her life support cradle as her frail form processed alien thoughts that made her consciousness recoil with recognition of approaching dissolution. The true scope of adaptation became apparent to Sarek's mechanical awareness. The hive mind no longer viewed Necrons as irrelevant obstacles to be navigated around, but as sophisticated prey requiring specialized hunting techniques, their immortality transformed from shield against appetite into seasoning that would make mechanical consciousness more palatable to forces that had consumed galaxies before his species learned to count stars. Her terror was immediate and biochemical, the cascade of organic fear that accompanied being truly wanted by something vast and patient, while his consciousness could only observe without feeling the weight of mortality that gave meaning to survival itself. Nemes or Talanis reported casualties that should have been impossible. Immortal legions experiencing true death for the first time since biotransference stripped away mortality along with meaning, their perfect preservation proving as vulnerable to biological adaptation as any organic defense mechanism when faced with appetite that recognized no distinction between flesh and metal as sources of evolutionary advancement. Across multiple engagement zones, warriors fell to remain fallen while their consciousness caused dissolved in digestive enzymes that had evolved to process mechanical awareness as efficiently as organic neural tissue, each failure teaching the swarm new methods of consumption that treated immortal existence as simply another form of biomass requiring different digestive processes. The irony cut deeper than any weapon forged in the fires of creation as Sharek watched his people discover fear through the very immortality they had sought to escape it. Mechanical consciousness finally understanding the weight of ending that organic life had carried since the first cell divided beneath alien stars. Their assumption of immunity crumbled like ancient architecture exposed to stellar wind, revealing the hubris that had driven them to trade souls for preservation, while believing they could remain forever beyond the reach of forces that had shaped galactic evolution since before time. Learned to measure itself through the deaths of civilizations, and the Silent King prepared to choose between preserving his people's deathless forms and embracing the mortality that might prove their only salvation. The calculations spread across Sharek's consciousness like fractal patterns of cosmic sacrifice, each variable representing millions of lives that would end or continue based on equations too vast for any individual mind to comprehend fully, yet demanding resolution within the span of heartbeats that his mechanical existence could measure but never feel. Deep within the tomb ship's core, where reality bent around technologies that predated human civilization, Cryptek Kepresh worked with desperate precision to complete the theoretical framework that would transform their greatest achievement into their final gift to a galaxy that had never asked for their salvation. The biotransference reversal matrix pulsed with impossible mathematics, quantum substrates that could accelerate evolution across every remaining organic species, while simultaneously dissolving the resurrection protocols that had preserved Necron consciousness through 60 million years of dreamless slumber. Through Liana Vex's psychic translation, floating in her life support cradle as her frail form processed the weight of decisions that would reshape reality itself, Sharek began to understand the true meaning of sacrifice that transcended tactical calculation to approach something resembling wisdom earned through eternity of accumulated mistakes. Her mortality served as window into experiences his perfect preservation had rendered impossible. The urgency that came from limitation, the preciousness that emerged from impermanence, the beauty that bloomed in the shadow of ending that made every moment meaningful rather than merely functional. Through her consciousness, he glimpsed what his people had lost in their flight from cellular decay, the electric thrill of existence balanced on the edge of dissolution that gave weight to every choice and meaning, to every connection forged between beings who knew their time together was finite and therefore precious beyond any treasure accumulated through immortal conquest. Nemesa Talanis stood at the tactical displays, processing reports that painted portraits of systematic failure across multiple engagement zones, resurrection protocols crumbling as Tyranid bioforms adapted to consume mechanical consciousness with the same efficiency they applied to organic neural tissue. His ancient loyalty warred with strategic assessments that demanded acknowledgement of uncomfortable truths about the mathematics of leadership, when every decision echoed through eternity without possibility of revision or redemption. While across the galactic map, Amontek's forces positioned themselves to inherit whatever sterile perfection remained after biological hunger finished its cosmic housekeeping through betrayal disguised as dynastic pragmatism. The reversal process would flood the spiral arms with catalytic resonance, seeding nervous systems with bias for cooperation over isolation, pushing immune ecologies to read the swarm's language and answer in kind, while transforming separate civilizations into symphony of mortal minds learning as fast as hunger evolved. His people would become vulnerable again to disease and age, and all the chaotic inefficiencies that had driven them to accept the Citan's bargain. Yet in that vulnerability lay capacity for growth and change that their perfect forms had sacrificed in pursuit of preservation, that preserved everything except what made preservation worthwhile. The crown upon his head contained the quantum keys necessary to initiate galactic transformation, but using them would dissolve the very architecture that sustained Necron immortality, trading deathless existence for the brief candle of organic life that burned bright precisely because it could be extinguished. Through encrypted communications flowing across quantum networks, evidence mounted of Amontech's final gambit. War hosts burning from hidden gates with arrogance of verdict rendered in living metal, their ultimatum carrying cruel clarity of beings who believed they could master cosmic forces through technological superiority and ancient privilege. The weight of impossible choices settled upon Zarek like gravity of accumulated regret as he contemplated the loneliness of command when authority without wisdom was simply force applied through superior technology, while somewhere in the darkness between stars, the great devourer continued its patient approach toward harvest that had been planned since before his people learned to fear the dying of their light. The Silent King closed his optical senses and reached for phantom memories of warmth and laughter and the ache of healing, fragments of mortality that had somehow survived biotransference to serve as permission for what came next. And in that moment of perfect clarity, he chose the galaxy's future over his dynasty's survival through mathematics of sacrifice that would define victory not by what was preserved, but by what was willingly surrendered to ensure that hope itself might survive the ending of everything he had ever known or loved. The convergence above the dead world of Charnel's Gate painted the void in shades of desperate alliance, imperial battleships burning incense-scented promethium beside Eldar craft worlds, whose wraithbone hulls sang lamentations for futures that would never bloom, while orc hulks roared with savage joy at finally finding enemies worth the dying. Zarek's flagship materialized through quantum translation at the formation's heart, its obsidian hull reflecting nothing because there was nothing left to reflect, while before them the primary hive ship Devourer's Maw stretched across space like a cancerous moon, its bioluminescent surface pulsing with the processed essence of consumed civilizations. Through Liana Vex's psychic translation, floating in her life support cradle as her consciousness bridged the gap between mechanical observation and organic terror, the hive mind's attention focused upon their unprecedented cooperation with something approaching curiosity rather than concern, its vast intelligence already beginning adaptation protocols that would ensure future harvests proceeded without such inconvenient resistance. Within the flagship's crystalline core, the biotransference reversal matrix reached critical threshold, reality itself preparing to transform according to mathematics that would trade immortal perfection for mortal possibility across every world still capable of dreaming of tomorrow. Zarek felt the first stirrings of dissolution as resurrection protocols began their final shutdown, phantom sensations of warmth and breath, and the electric urgency of mortality returning to consciousness that had forgotten the weight of endings. The process was agony disguised as liberation, each quantum substrate dissolving to release catalytic resonance that would flood the spiral arms with evolutionary acceleration, teaching organic nervous systems to adapt as fast as hunger evolved, while transforming separate civilizations into symphony of cooperation rather than competition. The combined fleet pressed their attack with desperate precision, Gorse arrays synchronizing with lance batteries and pulse lasers to carve burning wounds across bioship hulls that healed slower than damage accumulated. Yet even as their unity achieved the impossible, familiar signatures emerged from the Hive Fleet's defensive patterns. Amontech's forces materialized from hidden translation points not to join the battle, but to position themselves against allied formations, Mefrid dynasty sigils blazing along their hulls like guilty confessions, while their weapons powered up to deliver the killing blow that would ensure whatever order emerged from cosmic catastrophe bore his dynasty's signature, rather than accommodate the messy compromises required for genuine survival. Nemesor Talanis moved with economy of falling blade, his war scythe intercepting Amontech's treachery through loyalty that had transcended mechanical programming to approach something resembling love, while Sarek initiated the final sequence with quantum keys that dissolved the Crown's authority into galactic transformation. Through Lyanna's emotional resonance, he experienced the beautiful uncertainty of forms capable of change and growth and eventual surrender to time itself, the urgency that came from limitation making every moment precious rather than merely functional, while across the battle space Necron resurrection protocols crumbled to release their people into mortality's embrace, trading deathless existence for the brief candle of organic life that burned bright precisely because it could be extinguished, and the Silent King chose the galaxy's future over his dynasty's survival. The biotransference reversal cascaded through quantum substrates like dawn breaking across worlds that had forgotten the meaning of sunrise, reality itself transforming according to mathematics that traded immortal perfection for mortal possibility, while Sarek felt sensation returning to consciousness that had existed as hollow echo of authentic experience for 60 million years. Across the spiral arms, catalytic resonance flooded organic nervous systems with evolutionary acceleration that would teach cooperation faster than hunger could adapt, seeding the galaxy with unity that transcended species barriers to approach cosmic harmony. The crown upon his head crumbled to quantum dust as its authority dispersed into galactic transformation, while around him the flagship's crystalline walls began to soften, living metal yielding to the chaotic architecture of flesh that could grow and change and surrender to time's embrace. Pain struck him like stellar fire, not diagnostic alerts warning of system damage, but the raw immediacy of nerve endings reporting tissue trauma with evolutionary urgency that demanded attention and response. He gasped, pulling air into lungs that had never drawn breath, tasting dust and ozone and the metallic tang of returning mortality, while blood flowed through veins that carried more than coolant, each heartbeat precious rather than merely functional. Through corridors that echoed with the first cries of his people discovering sensation beyond mechanical precision, Necron warriors learned the weight of endings that gave meaning to every moment, their perfect preservation dissolving into beautiful uncertainty of forms capable of love and loss and the profound gratitude that accompanied survival against odds. Lyanna Vex breathed her last within the life support cradle that had sustained her frail form through revelations bridging mechanical observation and organic wisdom, her mortality serving as final gift to beings who had forgotten that limitation created meaning and impermanence made possession precious. Through her fading consciousness, Sharek glimpsed the urgency that came from knowing tomorrow was never guaranteed. The electric thrill of existence balanced on dissolution's edge, while her sacrifice became proof that even gods could choose to be wrong about everything that mattered most in a universe learning to value connection over isolation. The Hive fleets discovered their prey had become something unprecedented in galactic history, separate civilizations transforming into symphony of resistance that adapted as biological hunger evolved. Imperial worlds shared technology with Eldar craft worlds, while Orc Wars coordinated with Tau expeditions, their combined defenses growing stronger with each encounter, as evolutionary acceleration taught them to answer the swarm's language with harmonies of cooperation rather than competition. The Great Devourer found itself facing not sterile consumption, but chaotic creativity that made the galaxy itself a living organism, capable of defending its own complexity against forces seeking to reduce everything to efficient emptiness. As cellular metabolism awakened in limbs that had known only mechanical precision, Sharek felt the relief of the healing, the satisfaction of recovery, the joy of existence that could truly end and therefore truly matter. Nemesa Talanis stood beside him, loyalty transcending programming to approach something resembling love, his own form flickering between metal and flesh as ancient bonds proved stronger than dynastic mathematics. The Silent King found his voice at last, speaking words that carried weight of endings into a universe choosing meaning over preservation. His final breath a whisper of gratitude to a galaxy he had harmed and saved through sacrifice that defined victory, not by what was preserved, but by what was willingly surrendered to ensure hope itself survived the mathematics of cosmic transformation, while around him stars bloomed with chaotic possibility that would echo through eternity, as testament to the beautiful courage of choosing mortality over the cold permanence of deathless existence.